Now, I am pleased to be joined by Bob Herbert, who is one of the all-time great New York Times columnists. It's a real pleasure having you here.
Great to be here. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. It's great to have you. You're now at Demos, which is a progressive think tank. Michael Brendan Doherty of the American Conservative, who is one of my favorite. I would say you're my favorite Latin mass conservative.
Oh, thank you.
It's stiff competition, but you win. I want to talk first off this morning about the memo that John Boehner put out. I have the text of it right here. Basically, his staff put out a memo saying, all right, here's where we are on the American Jobs Act, which is the president's piece of legislation. I will note, not the American Jobs Act that prankster Louis Gohmert, the Tea Party Republican congressman, introduced as a joke to beat the president. Bob, there were two ways to interpret the Boehner speech and this memo, which is one was, oh, they're open to compromise. He sort of seemed to leave the window open. And the other was slamming the door shut on the president. Which of those do you think it was?
He's trying to have it both ways. One, he'd like to present the Republican Party as willing to compromise on reasonable aspects of this legislation, proposed legislation. The other part is in the real world, you know, it's going nowhere. The Republicans are going to be opposed. So it's sort of 6 of one, half a dozen of the other.
Well, I also think that there's a situation in which one of the things that's maddening about this whole thing is if you looked at his speech on Thursday, there was nary, not one mention of the financial crisis. It is if the financial crisis never happened. And I understand that liberals do the same thing, which is that we have our biases to begin with, and then every new situation is an excuse for us to drop in the policy that we favor. So I'm not exempting myself from this, but the degree to which the Republicans are doing that right now seems really stunning. I mean, everything in their plan, everything in Boehner's speech was like ripped out of a right-wing time capsule and sort of dropped into this period as if we haven't just had this extraordinary event, unprecedented in 70 years. Michael, defend yourself.
I can't. But I mean, the politics of this isn't really a surprise, right? So Boehner came out and said, well, we agree with everything that we agreed with already.
Right.
And both sides are trying to have it both ways. I think Obama wants to run a little bit to the middle because he thinks he's got the base locked up. And if he doesn't have
more than a little bit to the middle, I think.
Right. Well, even to the right, because his base will be locked up by whoever the Republican nominee is, whether it's Rick Perry or Mitt Romney. The prospect of that will bring the left right back home, I think.
It was interesting to me, the New York Times this morning, the headline they went with is, in poll, support for Obama slips among the base, which I thought was an interesting headline on this poll. The poll does not have very good numbers for the president. It's a 57% disapproval rating. 3/4 of people think we're on the wrong track. This is not particularly surprising because I think we all agree. I want to know who the 25% of people are who think we're on the right track. I think they must be mostly bankers. Do you feel like, well, there aren't that many bankers, actually. It doesn't employ that many people. Do you feel like, I felt like the sort of story of the week was kind of wheels coming off the bus a little bit in Obama land? Was that your sort of feeling?
Very much so. Well, I agree with the idea that both parties are trying to have it both ways. I think there's no question about that. I think it hurts the Democrats, or at least it hurts the president more because the Republicans are playing to their true believers. The Republicans are playing to issues and ideologies that Republican voters are squarely behind. Obama is doing something different. Obama is deviating from what his base wants and not gaining support elsewhere. So he's getting the worst of both worlds right now.
Isn't worst of both worlds the sort of negotiating motto over the last, I mean, really, since the Republican Congress took over, I think there's a case to be made that that has been somewhat par for the course.
I completely agree with that, yeah.
And yet, here is the one takeaway from this poll that I think is, in some ways, should be the banner headline, right? In another universe. Here, I want to read you the presidential approval from the fall of the first year of first term. Carter, 31%, Reagan, 46%, George H.W. Bush, 70%, and Obama, 43%. There is a case to be made, and people talk about when things are going poorly in the White House, everybody all of a sudden wants to talk about how everyone's an idiot inside the White House and their political team is terrible, and James Carville's telling everyone to fire people, and people are talking smack about Bill Daley, the chief of staff to the HuffPo, and I think there's a case to be made that given the objective conditions of the country, the fact the president is only at 43% is absolutely a remarkable, stunning feat of political, talent.
Well, the Americans like the president. I mean, still, his likability factor is very high, even if his job approval rating is sunk pretty low. I think even the median voter, the independent voter, is rooting for the president. He doesn't think the president's malicious. You know, the median voter isn't a Tea Partier.
Right.
So there's a lot to work with there for Obama, and the fact is, the right nominee on the Republican side can fix everything. I mean, his numbers are similar to Reagan's, but Reagan won in a landslide in '84.
Right. I mean, yeah.
Well, the right nominee on the Republican side, though, right now seems to be Obama's only hope. Obama has a couple of things going against him that the other presidents didn't have. One, his disapproval rating is getting very high now. Two, he's got a terrible economy, and even the White House is saying that it's not going to be much better, if at all, next year at this time, which would be very close to the election. So he's really got to pull a rabbit out of the hat, and the only rabbit on the horizon right now is the potential Republican nominee.
Right, which is clearly going to consolidate the base, and we're going to talk about that in a bit. I want to ask a sort of philosophical question about this, because I've been thinking about this. You know, Jimmy Carter, you grow up and you think, you know, I was born in the last year of Jimmy Carter's administration.
We don't need to go there.
Others may remember it better, but you grow up and there's a history of like the sort of feckless, you know, incompetent Jimmy Carter, and he gave this malaise speech, of course, in which he never said the word malaise, famously, and Tank, you know, he got his butt kicked by Reagan. And, you know, whereas Bill Clinton is a political mastermind, he got reelected. And I wonder how much it's just us attributing to presidential leadership just the basic facts of the economy, you know, that Jimmy Carter had the poor fortune to be...
No, we do that. When Carville said it's the economy is stupid, he knew what he was talking about, whether it's fair or not, whether it's right or accurate or not. If the economy is going great guns in a presidential election, a sitting president is more likely to get reelected. If the economy tanks, you know, the president is in trouble. With the first Bush, the economy actually apparently was coming out of a recession, but the public didn't feel it yet, and he paid the price for it.
Well, message is important too, though. So when George H.W. Bush was running for re-election, we were heading towards recession, and actually by the end of at the very end of his term, we were heading towards recovery already. But he didn't know the price of a gallon of milk,
right?
And it showed that he was disconnected. And here's one thing where I agree with progressives that say that messaging can do a lot. You know, FDR during the Depression and late in the Depression, in the double dip, he was still communicating with the public very effectively, and people felt tied to him, and the public felt that he was tied to them.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. It's funny you bring up the George H.W. Bush moment. There's this iconic moment from that campaign, right, in '92, where he goes to look at a supermarket checkout scan. And there's a pool report filed. I was just reading about this for the book I'm working on. And there's a pool report filed that makes him seem like he had like landed from Mars and never seen one of these before. And it's this totally devastating thing. It runs in the Times. I think it's Andrew Rosenthal, actually, is the one who writes the bylines of peace. And I read this, actually, you know, this sort of debunking of it that said, actually, it was like some new scanner technology, and he was totally right to be blown away by it. But the point is that the economic conditions tend to overdetermine even the interpretive framework that we bring to it, right? So it's like everybody is prepped to see us out of touch. Everyone is sort of prepped right now because things aren't going well to see the president as sort of listless or.
And Obama has two problems: one that's similar to Jimmy Carter's, and one that's similar to George H.W. Bush. One is that he is increasingly perceived as ineffective, as Jimmy Carter was, and two, he's increasingly seen as out of touch with the problems facing working people and working families in this country, similar to the first George Bush.
Yeah.
Right. And the other thing is that on messaging, again, in the 30s, when Roosevelt was doing his fireside chats.
I love your love for Roosevelt. Continue.
Well, the right had the Chicago Tribune, but the Chicago Tribune doesn't but it doesn't broadcast into every house in the 30s like the radio did.
Right.
So there wasn't a constant scramble about what is the president doing, what does his messaging mean, and there wasn't a kind of constant pushback like you're getting now from the Republican side.
And one of the things I think you've seen with him sort of hitting the road, and he's been giving essentially a stump speech in favor of the American Jobs Act, and this is something that people have been asked, sort of, I think, I would say liberals, the sort of progressive base, has been kind of wanting him to do, was sort of draw a clear distinction, send a bill to Congress, and go out and sell it. And one of the things I think you're seeing is it's hard to do that. That the nature of how balkanized media consumption is at this moment, the sort of distractibility of the American public, which God, I know I'm part of, as I'm tweeting while we're talking. But you know, it is very hard to focus attention on some sort of grand battle in this environment, certainly compared to 1937 with a broadcast media, and certainly even compared to 1948 when Truman ran against the Do-Nothing Congress, and compared to, I think, you know, 1996 even when Clinton ran for re-election.
Right.
Each successive year brings us into a media environment in which that bully pulpit power actually diminishes.
Right, and every conservative who already didn't like the president, the only part of the speech they saw him give this week was, "If you love me, you will pass this bill."
Yes.
Just a 20-second clip on YouTube, and that was all they saw.
And that was that was everywhere on Fox News,
and
right?
It was a
response, I think, to someone in the audience, right? Someone in the audience
someone
yelled
said,
out, "I love you," and it wasn't like scripted. He didn't say like, "Hey, how you doing? If you love me, pass this bill." Right? Yeah. No, I saw that and I thought, oh God, we're gonna see that everywhere.
If you love